We're going to revisit the Balaadi and Jagradi Avasthas. In a previous video on this channel, I did explore the Balaadi and Jagradi Avasthas. We just want to touch upon them just a little bit more to see how they work when we're considering what a house lord is going to do and how a planet is going to be able to impact the chart. So first thing that we need to remember is that with the Balaadi Avasthas, there are 5 states. The infant state, the adolescent state, the adult state, the old state, and the dead state. Let's see if we can pull these up here, just so we can review. Here we are. And again, this was covered in the previous talk. But as you can see, when we have a planet in an odd sign, when it's between these degrees, 0 to 6 essentially, it's an Abala infant state. Between 6 to 12, Kumara adolescent state. 12 to 18, a Yuva adult state. 18 to 24, old Vriddha. 24 to 30, Mrita or dead. And again, that's when we have a planet in an odd sign. And it goes reverse in the even signs, meaning that 0 to 6 is Mrita or dead, 6 to 12 is Vriddha, old, 12 to 18, Yuva, adult, and so on. So it just goes backwards. And we have to remember, what do these mean? Well, they can be used for at least 2 things. Number one, what I use them for is to consider what is the state of karmic fruition of a planet. Meaning that if you're looking at a chart, for example, this chart here, and let's say we are considering Mars. Well, Mars is in the 8th house. Mars is debilitated. Whenever we have a planet in bad dignity, it's going to hurt the house that it's in. When we have a planet in good dignity, it's going to help the house that it's in. What's bad dignity or difficult dignity? Enemy, great enemy, debilitation. What's average, neutral, friend sign? When do we start seeing a planet really helping the house that it's in? That is great friend, Mula Trikona, exaltation. So planets in good dignity will help the house and the affairs of that house. Planets in bad dignity will hurt it. Neutral planets, average. Now, since we have Mars here in the 8th in debilitation, well, that's bad dignity. That's as bad as it gets, essentially. So Mars has the potential to really profoundly hurt 8th house affairs. And what are 8th house affairs? Well, it's our life force. It's our longevity. It is the resources of our partners, whether that's romantic partners or business partners. It's their resources. And when we get into the actual descriptions of the houses, you'll see more of what this means. Or again, reading The Art and Science of Vedic Astrology, we do cover what the houses mean. But any good book on Vedic astrology should do that. So we have Mars hurting this house. And we have to consider, how much can Mars hurt that house? What is the state of karmic fruition of that Mars? Well, we check. And we see that, let's see if I can pull it over here. Here we go. We see that Mars is in a Kumara Balaadi Avasthas. And what is Kumara? Well, that's the adolescent state. So that means that this karma of Mars negatively impacting the person's health, vitality, legal battles, other people's resources, has the capacity to hurt that house to the level of an adolescent. So whereas an adult can do pretty much anything that he or she wants, which if this karma would have been in an adult state, that would have been a very powerful negative karma. Adolescent, it's not quite mature, which means that it's more potent than a bala, than a youth, a baby that can't do anything. But it's not as mature, so it's not going to give, it's not going to kill the person, essentially. If this would have been in a yuva or an adult state would have had more capacity to really seriously shorten the person's lifespan. All right. Now, the other thing about the Balaadi Avasthas and the karmic state of fruition is that since this is in an adolescent state, it's showing that that karma is nearly mature, which means that we need to advise the person that managing their health, managing their vitality, making sure that they don't waste their partner's finances, all these types of things related to Mars in the 8th, they'll need to have more awareness of, because since it's not mature yet, there's a greater likelihood that they can resist it and that they can do remedial measures to prevent it from happening. So when we have a planet in bad dignity, we want that planet in Amrita Avashta or Vrida Avashta or Bala Avashta. Why? Because when it's in a Vrida Avashta, it means it's an old karma. It's a passing karma. We'll still need to do some work on it, but it's essentially like an elderly person who can't do everything for themselves. When it's in Amrita Avashta or a dead state, well then, that's an old dead karma, which means that many past lifetimes they've suffered through this, and so now there's just a remnant left over of it. So that takes even less work to deal with. If it's in a Bala Avashta, that's telling us that the karma is growing. It just started, maybe 2 or 3 lifetimes ago, we'll say. And during this life, since it's just an infant, they have a better likelihood to resist that karma. So think of it this way. An infant, easy to overcome and resist. You can pretty much do with it what you want as long as you put attention towards it. If you don't, eventually it'll grow into an adolescent and an adult. An adolescent, as long as you claim your authority, same thing. But once it's in an adult state, that's where it becomes fairly difficult, because that's mature, it can do what it needs to do, and so that's like you fighting or wrestling with an adult. So consider that when we're looking at this state of karmic fruition with the planets. If this would have been in good dignity, or let's see if we've got a planet here we can consider. Let's consider Saturn. Okay, well Saturn's in a great friend sign in the 7th house, which is going to show that Saturn is going to help that 7th house. Now sure, Saturn still might delay marriage or give a second marriage, but what's going to show is that their second marriage or relationships they get into later in life are going to be better marriages. So still gives delays, still gives obstacles, but since it's in good dignity, it makes the person have better relationships as they mature, as they get older. But what we see is that Saturn is in Amrita Avashta, which shows that the karmic fruition is essentially dead, which means that Saturn will, to a degree, very minimally, be able to help them maintain long-term steady relationships. But what this tells me is that throughout their lifetimes, they have been able to do that. And so now this is an old dead karma. So when we're looking at it more from a spiritual level, more from a soul level, it shows us the state of karmic fruition within a person's chart. Okay. And just to consider this person has had many health issues, things that were seemingly life-threatening, I mean seriously life-threatening, but they were able to resist them and overcome them, at least 2 that I can think of. 2 major illnesses that if anyone else had these illnesses, it probably would have killed them, and they just happened to have both of them. So why? It was in a Kumara state, was able to resist. Also, if we look at the 30th divisional chart, here's the 30th for health, we see that Saturn rules the 6th Bhava cusp and the 8th Bhava cusp. Very important Bhava cusps for health. And Saturn is in debilitation here. Pull that over. Saturn is in debilitation, which is bad for health. Because we want to have a good Saturn in the 30th divisional chart, because Saturn allows us to have a strong immune system and really persevere through difficulties. What do we see? Even though Saturn is in a debilitated state, it's in a Bala Avashta. So still, serious health issues indicated by that debilitated Saturn, but since it's in a Bala Avashta, it was a newly forming karma, particularly for health or fated illnesses and diseases, and they overcame them. So that's how we can start to see these states of karmic fruition. If Saturn would have been in terrible dignity and had been in an adult state, well, then you're more likely to predict something like death or serious accident or serious injury or serious problems as related to the 30th divisional chart. Now this brings us to our next idea, which are the Jagradi Avasthas. And what are the Jagradi Avasthas? Well, they show the states of the planets as either Svapna, as either Sushupti, which is asleep, Svapna, which is sleepy, and Jagrat, which is wide awake. So we can think of the planets as though when they're Sushupti, they're unconscious. So they're not really doing too much of anything. They're not able to maintain the affairs of the things that they rule. When they're Svapna, they're semi-conscious. So just like an individual can be half awake and still be functional, they're still not on the ball or 100% active. When a planet is in Jagrat, well then they're wide awake, which means they're very powerfully able to take care of the affairs of the things that they rule. And what are the things that the planets rule? Well, the things the planet rules are the houses. Okay, so looking at this Rashi chart one more time, we see that the sun is Sushupti. What house does the sun rule? The house rules the ninth. The sun rules the ninth house, which deals with father. It deals with the culture that we come from, how our parents raised us, all these sorts of things. And by having the sun Sushupti or asleep, it shows that the sun doesn't have the capacity to promote or take care of those areas of its life. If we look at Mars rules the 5th and Mars rules the 12th. Well, the 5th is our children. Now, it doesn't mean this person can't have children. It just means that when it comes to time to take care of those children or be very active in their lives, since the ruler of the 5th is Sushupti, asleep, there isn't really that energy there for it. Same thing with the 12th, dealing with expenses, managing expenses. Well, since the lord of the 12th is asleep, being able to manage one's expenses is very difficult because the energy or the entity Mars, which is meant to manage expenses, is asleep, so it can't do it. Now, it doesn't mean, again, as I mentioned, that there's no success in these areas, because we have to remember that using the Jagadi Avasthas, remember, Avashta simply means state. So there are different kinds of states. There's the Balaadi Avashta, which shows what is the state of karmic fruition of the planet. There's the Jagradi Avasthas, which show whether a planet can take care of its affairs of the houses that it rules, what's the state of its ability to take care of the houses that it rules. Then the Jagadi Avasthas, which show how are the planets impacting each other. So just like this 5th lord can be asleep, sleepy, well, if he has Jagadi Avasthas that are helping him, and who can help him, who can delight him but his friends, Sun, Moon, and Jupiter. And if we go to this chart here, what we see is that Sun's not helping Mars. See, there's nothing there. Moon is helping Mars to plus 135 points. That's pretty good. Mars has no energy of his own. Again, that's because he's asleep. Mercury is hurting Mars to negative 11.9, and Jupiter is not helping Mars. So Mars by himself can't do it, but he gets help from the moon. And what is the moon? Well, the moon rules the 8th house, which is, again, other people's resources, or the resources of your partners, or relationships. So these are some ways that you can start to put these things together, where on one hand, the person doesn't do anything on their own, but they get help from other areas of the chart, other areas, other planets. And this is how we start to paint a really clear picture of who an individual is, how their life works, and it's all based on these Avashtas. And in order to use these Avashtas well, number one, you have to know what do all the planets represent innately. So go back and listen to Mars or listen to Jupiter to talk on these planets, figure out what do they mean innately. Number two, you have to know what do the houses mean. And we'll get to that in about 2 videos from now. And once you know what the houses mean, then you can understand that, all right, the Lord of the 5th and the 12th is in a Kumara adolescent state, so that karma is going to point towards a nearly mature karma. And let's see what that can mean. Let's see if we can find it here. So we want the ruler of the 5th and the 8th. Okay, 5th and the 8th. There we go. So 5th and the 8th, since it's a negative dignity, we're primarily going to look at the negative influences here. And what can this karma mean? Well, the mind can be unstable. There can be sudden dramatic problems with children. The mind can be caught between different worlds or planes of existence, so psychological issues. Thoughts negatively impact one's health. It's a typo, we'll have to fix that. Prone to lying and deception. Negative past life karmas cause severe illnesses, which this person has experienced. So since we know that the Lord of the 5th is in the 8th, and it's debilitated, then we go and we figure out what does the 5th and the 8th mean. Debilitated, we look at the negative. That's going to tell us. Now, how developed is this karma? Well, now we look at the Balaadi Avasthas, the Balaadi Avasthas. It's a Kumara state, so it's nearly mature. So these are going to have more impact. If it was in a Bala or Mrita Avashta, it might not have that much impact. These could be passing traits or tendencies that the person has. All right, so that's how we use the dignity, and that's how we use the Balaadi Avasthas. Now, with the Jagraadi Avasthas, and you have to pardon my pronunciation there. I've heard it pronounced Jagradi Avasthas and Jagradi Avasthas. I'll have to look at that now that I think about it. But anyway, now what we want to consider is this planet able to take care of its 5th house affairs, its 12th house affairs, which is different than this here. How strong is the 5th house? How strong is their children? How strong is their ability to meet their expenses? How strong is their ability to contemplate? All that's going to be dependent on the Jagradi Avasthas. Okay. And once you have that down, that's when we start looking towards the Lajatati Avasthas. And Lajatati Avasthas, unless you're really serious about astrology, don't worry about them right now. I think they're wonderful, and that's why you hear me talk about them so much, particularly that course on my website, because they help to really fill in the rest of the chart. But for now, get this in your mind first, and start thinking about simply what does it mean to have the ruler of the 5th and the 9th, or the ruler of the 5th and the 10th, and then color it in using these Balaadi Avasthas, using the dignity. And with the Jagadi Avasthas, whether they're awake or asleep, that shows us to what capacity does the moon have to help Mars, right? Because if the moon would have been in debilitation or an enemy's dignity, it would have had 0 points as well, so it wouldn't have been able to help Mars. The fact that it's in a friend's dignity, if I'm correct here, yes, the moon is in Svapna, which is sleepy, so it's semi-conscious. It does have capacity to help this Mars. So these are all things to consider. Again, it's a lot. You want to go back and review the video on the Balaadi and Jagradi Avasthas that I've already done to get some more information on that. But for the sake of completeness of this survey course that we're doing, this 52-section survey course, I did want to go ahead back over this and review it. So thank you for your time. And next up, we will be looking at, I believe it's combustion and retrograde status. Yes, that's correct.